Welcome to the Business of Learning, the Learning Leaders podcast from Training Industry, where we speak with industry experts and thought leaders on all things learning and development.
Hi, welcome back to the Business of Learning. I'm Michelle Eggleston Schwartz, Editor-in-Chief at Training Industry.
And I'm Sarah Gallo, Senior Editor. Measuring the impact of training has long been a challenge for learning leaders. Training industry research even found that of all the core training management responsibilities, assessing business and training performance is the one that learning professionals are most likely to rate themselves as below average. So today we're excited to discuss the International Organization for Standardization, or ISO's, recently released standards for L&D metrics, how they can provide a much-needed framework for training measurement. This topic was also explored in the recently released Training Industry ebook, Learning Measurement for Modern Business, Making Sense of ISO 30437, which we'll link to in the show notes for this episode. With us, we have Dr. Tom Whelan, Director of Corporate Research here at Training Industry. Tom, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, welcome. I'm super excited to dig into this topic today because, as Sarah mentioned, measuring the impact of training is extremely challenging. And as Sarah also mentioned, the ISO recent released their guidelines for L&D metrics, which are the first ever official international standard for L&D metrics. Can you kind of touch on why this is significant and why did it take so long to formalize guidelines around L&D metrics?
I guess so. I'll answer the second half of it first. So I think why it took so long to formalize some guidelines around L&D metrics um, is that largely, but I mean, most of us have been working off of the Kirkpatrick model for evaluation. You know, it was I go into this in excruciating detail in other spots, so I'll try to give a Cliff Notes version of it here. It was kind of crafted in between 1959 and 1960. Like that's when he first published it. And it gained steam. And for a long time, it wasn't really broke. So nobody was trying to fix it. Or at least I think for a good number of years, for as much as learning leaders needed to be able to report back to stakeholders or higher ups or whoever it might be, you know, whoever they were accountable to, that Kirkpatrick allowed them to gather enough ammunition, as it were, to adequately address maybe some of the questions they were getting from the larger organization. Um, that said, I think you know a lot of us in L&D have had a sentiment for a while, at least certainly pre-COVID, that you know how do we get a seat at the table? We're doing all these activities. It doesn't seem like anybody you know up the ladder is really all that concerned about it. You know, so how are we showing our value? How are we substantiating what we're doing here? And I think kind of in the absence of anybody paying attention to you, anything that you can bring to the table is good. And I think in a lot of those situations, the Kirkpatrick framework afforded a lot of learning leaders with just enough to be able to come to the table. Now, at least in my opinion, you know, from everybody that I've talked to that's been through business school, some people get introduced to the model, but I think most people largely don't know what it is. You know, so I think there's also been an army of L&D professionals walking around talking about, you know, level 4 ROI and level 2 learning outcomes. And if they walk into some board meetings and are trying to use that vocabulary and assume that everybody else knows what they're talking about, you know, yeah, they might, but chances are equally good that they won't. And so then you have this learning professional kind of walking around using this jargon that, you know, unless somebody goes and reads a Wikipedia entry, is just going to fall flat. Um, and I think with COVID, and so with all the shift to, you know, any training we were doing, we have to figure out a way to do it digitally, either in part or in full. I think we have seen the strategic importance of training grow a lot, like in the past 5 years. And so I think with that, suddenly there's been a renewed focus on, okay, what are we doing? How good is it? How efficient are we at it? Are we hitting the marks that we need to be able to hit? Um, and I think people have increasingly been turning around and realizing that this framework that comes all the way from 1960 just isn't cutting the mustard anymore. You know, like it doesn't um, account for digital transformation. It doesn't account for the globalization and the scope and scale of what training looks like now. I mean, as I hopefully not unfairly kind of point out in the ebook, like when the Kirkpatrick model was started, we didn't have people going up into space yet. Like we didn't have computers around. Like having mobile phones and the internet, like was science fiction dreams.
Mm.
So it's like that evaluation framework came from a world where you were probably doing training in a classroom with an instructor. Everybody was probably smoking cigarettes, or at least the instructor probably was. Like it was a totally different time.
Different time.
Um, yeah, and so I think over time, as we've continued to try to fit this mold of Kirkpatrick around, an evolving and modernizing set of training activities, it 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 fits less and less well. Like what was once a one size fits all hat is not fitting anybody's head really anymore. Um, and and I think like, and this has been reflected in data that we've collected as well. That it was from earlier this year. I think only like 24% of organizations that we surveyed out of, I think it was around 350, said that they are trying to adhere to the Kirkpatrick 4 level model. 24%. So like 3/4 of organizations are not using this quote unquote gold standard of training evaluation. Um, Now you might say, "Well, what are they doing instead? Are they doing something else, like something bigger and better?" And from what we see in the data, no, no, they're doing like kind of piecemeal things that aren't quite, it's giving them some information, but it's not quite really, I think, addressing the question of are we doing the right things? Is it working? Are we spending money in the right places? Well, so that was probably too long. So to go back to the first part of the question, why is this significant? Our sentiment is, these ISO standards are coming from they're coming from a place of business. So as opposed to uh, Kirkpatrick and Phillips and a lot of other people that have tried to appreciably improve, or just discuss what do we do for training evaluation. A lot of times it's taking its cues from a more academic approach to learning. And while that's great, and I mean obviously I'm coming from that world as too, so I'm 100% behind it. You can't talk that language necessarily to business professionals. Like what are the differences between learning a knowledge versus a skill? And there's nuances there. So how you might need to go after it is different. Yeah, interesting to me, interesting to us in L&D. Does a stakeholder and senior leadership care about any of that stuff? No. So are they are or not that all of them don't, but on average, they probably don't. Or at least are they going to be interested in metrics that tell them all about those things? Probably not. Um, so I think what makes the ISO significant is it gives learning leaders a way to look at training evaluation and approach it in a way that puts the stakeholder and the audience first. And rather than say, I have this structure of levels, so here's how I organize my answers, and so here's how I communicate them to everybody. And if you don't get what this is, then catch up because I'm talking about level 2 here, and stop calling it other things. It's level 2. It's always been level 2. It's like none of that matters anymore. It's all about who's the stakeholder, what do they want to know, or at least what's relevant to them, what's useful to them, and then what can you use to answer those particular questions, and what can you use to get a much fuller picture of the health and the progress that training is making inside the organization.
Yeah, that really speaking the language of the business is key. We've heard that time and time again just through conversations on this podcast, and we'll definitely dive deeper into like the nitty gritty here with the guidelines. But before we do, Tom, can you share a little bit more about some of those underlying challenges and really touch on why measuring impact is such a notorious challenge?
Okay, so I think historically some of the challenges that organizations have faced with this have have been around at least in my mind a couple things. One is getting access to the data at all. So so if there is data out there, if it lives in an HRIS somewhere, if it's in the LMS, if part of it is in like Mother HR, or if or any effectiveness or performance metrics, you have to go to maybe the department, like getting the information together that then you can tie together with training to be able to look at things like outcomes, or to be able to look at things like impact, is it just has never been easy. And even if you can get the data, then merging it into whatever you have is equally a like eyeball bleeding, like frustrating task. And anybody that's like, it shouldn't be that hard. It's like, you have much of you played with data sets. Like they're evil. They don't care about your feelings. Like they're like, it's usually not a fun time. So I think, like even getting to where the information lives to be able to look at it has historically been a challenge. Like I know, for years, one of the courses that we would always hear from learning leaders is I know it exists, I can't get to it, or whoever owns it like isn't going to let me look at it, or there's some business reason why they're holding it where they are, and they won't let, or they're just not gonna fulfill the request if somebody in L&D is looking at it, even if it's a valid reason. Um, and I think some of that was, if training wasn't particularly seen as strategically important, maybe that story has changed now. So maybe access is different in a lot of places. But I think that has been one of the big challenges. It's just, the information probably exists, but where is it? Who owns it? Are you friends with that person? Can you get access to it? If it's something that you're going to need to get repeated access to, how do you set that up? How do you, forge that rapport and create that relationship? So like in some ways, measurement is almost just as much about being able to navigate the ladders of politics inside the organization. So if you're, to say, for instance, like running a big sales training initiative, can you get access to sales performance data on the back end that you can then use to connect? Okay, we did this here in training, and here's what happened over here in outcomes. Like if you have no outcomes, well, then suddenly all you can do is be like, people liked the training. Like the catering was good. We made sure there was good sandwiches, and so that, like, people gave it a thumbs up at the end. Like, you have no idea what the impact is if you can never get your hands on what that information is. Um, so I think access is always the one of the biggest challenges. The second one, sort of as I already alluded to, is just, can you wrangle it? Like I think there are a lot of L&D professionals that, and this is not meant as any shade against them. They don't have the analytics horsepower to take a lot of this data, and maybe work with it to get it to do what they need it to do. And that's not meant to insult L&D people, like, because I think what I'm talking about isn't just like, ooh, can you put some data in Excel and move it around? Like, I thought it might be way more eye-watering than that. Like, can you get this SQL database to talk to this over here, and you got to figure out some Python code to pull this in from over here, so that you can even get and everything in one place to begin to see if you can work with it. Like, there's, I think, a lot of technical hurdles with working with data, that if you're new to it, that there is no shallow end of the pool, kind of. It's like you jump in and you can't touch the bottom. So if you don't learn to swim pretty quickly, yeah, you have data, but step two is you have to analyze the data to then get the results. And so if
Yeah.
either nobody on the team has the skills, or just nobody maybe they do have the skills, but they don't have the time, or the bandwidth to do those sort of things, then, access might be great, but if you're not able to actually run the numbers, then that's another problem. And then I think the if I'm going to try to keep this concise, the third challenge, that I think is more historically accurate than maybe it is now, is has been just getting stakeholders to listen. So if somebody in L&D has something to say about, hey, here's how we can improve training, here's how we could use this initiative to drive this part of the business forward, getting an audience for that, I think has been a big challenge for a lot of people. And like I said, I think that has changed in the past couple of years. I mean, it hasn't totally, turned 180 degrees for everybody. Um, but I think that has been a big challenge. And kind of along those lines, that's why, at least I feel like the ISO standards, um, affords learning leaders a different, not necessarily like language, but a different lens to look at training evaluation. So that the way that they're talking about it is different, so that maybe other stakeholders will listen. Because I think one of one of the things that struck me at least about this framework when the ISO put it out, is it distinguishes stakeholders, and I think that is something crucial that I've never seen in any discussion of Kirkpatrick. You know, that if you're talking about return on investment, or you're talking about transfer outcomes or something like that, who cares? And I don't say that to mean like, like rhetorically, like nobody cares about that. But no, not everybody does. Some people do, but who are those people? Does the learning professional even know? Like, so if they're going to package together all these metrics, who's the consumer of that metric? So if we're talking about kind of who cares, it's this idea that if you're if you're in the C-suite versus you're a learner versus you're the head of L&D versus you're a training manager versus you're a line manager somewhere, you don't want the same information about what's going on with training. The same information isn't relevant to the person in the C-suite as it is to the employee, as it is to the head of L&D. Each of those stakeholders have different data needs, some of them more intense, some of them less intense. And they don't all want the same answers. They don't all want to know about the same thing, or at least maybe what you would communicate to a learner, C-suite doesn't care about. What you're going to communicate to C-suite, the learners could care less about as well. It's not, doesn't help them, doesn't tell them anything about their job. So I think in terms of the challenge of just like getting anybody to listen to us about training, I think the ISO goes a long way towards um, giving learning leaders a at least like illuminating a pathway of like, if I have to talk to this person, what should I come with? What sort of things might they want to know about? What type of questions should I be asking? What type of answers might that person want? What form should those answers be in? So it sort of just disposes of all this level one, level two outcome stuff, because it's like that doesn't matter. Like level one or level two outcomes is important or not important, all depending on who you're talking to, all depending on what the content of those insights are, not so much what level did they come in at. And so I think with the greater specificity of the model, the challenge of getting anyone to pay attention, um, it starts to erode some of that, because if you're coming to different parts of the business with the types of answers that are relevant to different parts of the business, then suddenly your case isn't like, hey, pay attention to me and my important, like level four stuff. Like, I worked hard on this. I saw somebody talk at a conference and I sat in my office and chewed on this for 2 weeks. It's less of that and more like, I'm already talking in your language. Here's some things that it's more or less like, ignore them at your own peril, rather than trying to convince the stakeholder that they should buy into whatever the interpretation is, or that somehow data that maybe at first blush looks to them like a big who cares, that then you have to fight the battle of getting them to care, I think, rather than meeting them right where they already care.
Definitely. You definitely illustrated all the immense challenges associated with measuring the impact of training. And I have to imagine, like, we're at an interesting time where we just have access to an overwhelming amount of data, and being able to understand and identify what should I look at, and can I even get access to that data, to your point. Like, we're really at this kind of turning point that we really, as an industry, need that direction, some guidelines, so we can all speak the same language. And kind of turning back to the ISO guidelines, if you've anyone out there has had a chance to check these out, they are extremely thorough and a little complicated. So I'm hoping today, Tom, you can help break down these guidelines and just kind of some digestible and easy to understand insights. Kind of walk us through it.
All right, so to break down the 543 framework, um, so ISO released it in the middle of 2023. And when we saw it come out, like, immediately, I thought it was great. And we looked at what the industry's reaction to it was, and as you said, Michelle, like, it doesn't it 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 takes something complex and doesn't really remove the complexity from it. I think in the same way that the Kirkpatrick levels do, and I think that for some people that might be one of the first hurdles to get over, like, with looking at the framework. But but to us, not that complicated. I mean, certainly more complex than Kirkpatrick, but really not that complicated. And so we named it the 543 model. Because 543 are descending numbers, so it kind of rolls off the tongue real nice. But also because I think it it encapsulates sort of a lot of the ideas in the ISO standards. So each of those numbers stands for something, obviously. The five stands for the different types of stakeholders that might be interested in training information. So that could be senior organizational leaders, that can be group or team leaders, the head of learning, training managers, and the learners or employees themselves. So out of those five categories, as I sort of already alluded to, like they're not all going to want to know the same thing. All the same information is going to be relevant in the same way to all of them. So they're different consumers of information. Some of them want more, like I'm sure the head of learning probably wants a lot of information. The learners might say they want a lot of information, but you don't want to give them tons and tons and tons of information, and a lot of it isn't going to be relevant to them anyway. Um, so the that's sort of the first part of the framework, is there's five different stakeholders that are worth thinking about. You know, from who's in charge of the company all the way down to the learner. The four um, is about the four reasons to measure, and those are to inform, to monitor, to evaluate, or to manage. And I know it's not necessarily a synonym game; those all stand for stuff. So like inform is like simple questions. You know, if it's like, how many fingers do I have? Five. Question answer. It's done. There's no more interpretation to do in that. Um, Monitor is when you know you have some sort of historical benchmark to go against. So if it was like, how many fingers do I have? Five. How many fingers did I have 3 years ago? Still five. Cool. Still tracking with the historical benchmark. You know, so at that level, you're bringing in other things rather than just simply answering the question. Um, at the evaluate level, you're uh, that's when you're actually measuring kind of what's going on against goals. And then the manage sort of depth um, is about sort of proactively having this feedback channel where as information is coming in about what's going on with training, it's being used to simultaneously improve it. So rather than some other reasons to measure, which is just you're taking a pulse of something or comparing something to a goal or to some historical norm, in manage, it's continuous process improvement. So those are the four different reasons, and then the three, the last digit in the 543, is all about the types of metrics. So there's efficiency metrics, effectiveness metrics, and outcomes, which again, in a lot of L&D lexicon, we use those things interchangeably. But in ISO, they mean very, very distinct things. So I mean, efficiency metrics, and they say most things we're familiar with are probably efficiency metrics. Efficiency metrics might be like how many hours were used in training, how many learners went through training, how, you know, like all that sort of stuff. Effectiveness starts to get into, you know, potentially things like how much did it cost, how well did people do on tests of the content, like can we substantiate that people learned anything. And then outcomes is what's the impact, you know, because you can have a training that runs very inefficiently, doesn't seem very effective, but still has a lot of impact on the back end. Conversely, you can have, you know, trainings that are, you know, super efficient, you know, like bullet train type of efficiency, that are very effective, but they don't have a lot of impact on the back end, maybe intentionally or unintentionally. You know, so like all training doesn't have to have all of this stuff, or doesn't have to have data relevant to every single stakeholder, or have, you know, a all four reasons wrapped up in it. But I think what this framework does is allows learning leaders to kind of push back from the table for a sec and look at maybe what they're doing or what questions they're being asked, and say, okay, who's asking? Why are they asking? What do they want to know? And what do I have on hand? How should I answer this question that they have? Or what's the right form of answer for what they really want to know? That's going to be at the right level for who's asking. And, you know, so it's really about trying to, I think, match the metric to the need, rather than and I think what's common and why it seems really intimidating and daunting, which is just, you know, like to walk up to this big array of numbers and be like, I'm going to analyze all of you and I'm going to squeeze every insight that I can out of this big batch of numbers. It's like, no, as you pointed out, Michelle, there's way too much data running around now. So it's really about um, streamlining where and when you're actually looking at data. Because kind of like I said at the beginning, like if we're going off a Kirkpatrick model, you can calculate level 1, 2, 3, and 4 metrics. It's going to get harder as you get up the levels. Not everybody's going to care about all of them. So I think what the 543 framework does is allow learning leaders to focus in and go, all right, if I did a Kirkpatrick and everybody's going to care about all of that, what are the things that are worth doing, or what are the things worth taking the temperature of? Um, so whatever the business initiative is, or whatever the objective is, or maybe whatever turn the organization is trying to take strategically, how does training support that? How can we substantiate that? How can we evaluate that what we're doing is right or wrong? I mean, it's just as important to get information that things are going badly as it is that things are working. Because there's bad information and there's bad training. Those are not the same thing. Um, so I think that, and hopefully that seems simple. And in a nutshell, like that's how I think about the 543 framework is like, rather than being like like a recipe that you use no matter kind of what it is. It's more of a it's almost like more of a toolkit. It's way more adaptable. And I think of at least in my perspective, like once learning leaders get a little more familiar with it, or like are trying to think through that lens, allows them to have a much broader array of conversations with different stakeholders about training and the importance of training. And I think it appreciably expands even the impacts that we in L&D are aware that training could have on learners and on the business.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for breaking that helpful framework down to kind of guide our listeners through these guidelines and really, like you said, just take a strategic step back and focus their limited time and energy and resources on what really matters. Well, we'll be right back after a brief message from our sponsor. As a training professional, your job is to effectively manage the business of learning. You probably tune in to this podcast to gain insights on L&D trends being used by some of the most innovative thought leaders in our market. But did you know that training industry also provides data-driven analysis and best practices through our premium research reports? Our entire catalog, including reports on deconstructing 70-20-10, learner preferences, the modern learner experience, and AI's impact on L&D, just to name a few, can be found at trainingindustry.com/shop research. New insights create new ways for L&D to do business. Let Training Industry Research Reports take your training initiatives to new heights. Go to trainingindustry.com/shop research to view the entire catalog.
Tom, I'd love if you could share a little bit more about the three categories of metrics that are mentioned in the report that you touched on previously, which are efficacy, effectiveness, and outcomes. Are there of these metrics? Are any harder to measure than others? Kind of, if so, can you kind of share a little bit about kind of how we should approach these metrics?
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, like the ISO even calls out that most stuff is an efficiency measure. Um, and and the so I mean, because those are the three categories: efficiency, effectiveness, outcomes. Um, so we're for the most part awash in efficiency measures. So like, what's the utilization rate? What's the percentage of completion? Um, like you don't need more information to interpret that. A higher percentage is always going to be better than a lower percentage. Um, but for a lot of efficiency metrics, you have to have uh, things that are at least coming in at like the monitor depth. Because just having an answer without any historical knowledge or benchmark kind of behind it to tell you where things are going, I mean, you're sort of twisting in the wind. Like You can be like, our utilization is 65%. Well, is that good or bad? Like there's without a context for that, like 65 is just a number. Um, so efficiency metrics, I think, are the easiest ones for us to grasp onto because I think they're around us all the time. A lot of the automated metrics that a lot of platforms make, I think, tend to be efficiency metrics. Effectiveness metrics are all about the quality of the training. Like how good was the training? Was it designed well? Um, was the delivery of it effective? Was the content engaging? Um, are does it seem like employees are going to be able to apply it? Um, because obviously if learners in a training react kind of poorly to it, they don't really like it, they don't learn all that much, and the chance that they're going to apply it later, or if it just costs too much overall, like, well, then you have an ineffective training. But so effectiveness is all about, I think, or it gets closer to the classic Kirkpatrick levels than maybe efficiency metrics do. Um, And so that's the way I think about those two categories as the ISO has defined them. And then the last one, and to answer the question, I think this is the hardest one, is outcomes. Um, because for outcomes, it's not about the training. It's what's the metric targeted by the training. So if you're instituting a sales training that's trying to increase, close rates or something like that, that's your metric. Like, or that's the outcome that you're running after. I mean, like it seems kind of obvious to say, but how many learning programs have been stood up to affect something like sales close rates, and you're measuring effectiveness metrics. Did learners like it? You're measuring all sorts of efficiency things, like how many people did it, like what were the completion rates, all sorts of things like that. But did it move the needle on sales? And that information, kind of going back to what I said before, that information is usually the stuff that doesn't live in L&D, and so can be harder to get, or uh, you know figure out who has the right data that you need to crunch to make that tangible. But that's what, I mean, that's the ultimate goal of all this, is trying to drive that outcome. But that's what makes it, I think, the most difficult. And especially too, because an outcome metric isn't just one type of thing. So, like, is return on investment an outcome metric? Yeah. Is return on expectations an outcome metric? Yeah. Is something like a sales increase, or something, did something meet or exceed expectations? Like, yeah, those are all, so, like, it's not one thing. It's but I think the way, or the easiest way for me, that the ISO positions it, is it's easy to recognize an outcome. I don't know if they totally agree with this, but this is the way I think about it. It's easy to recognize an outcome as something that you need to take learning data and then add something else to it to get. So, like, if you're just looking at, like, data that comes out of an LMS, or the data that's internal to training, you have a lot of efficiency and effectiveness metrics. You don't necessarily have any outcomes until you're tying it to the outside world somehow, or tying it to something else going on in the business.
Yeah, definitely. So we're kind of breaking down those metrics for us. They definitely can kind of blend together. Well, I do want to
Yeah.
touch on another element here, and it may be kind of a lack thereof, but that it's that compliance element, because as of now, there's really no formal compliance certification or audit process for these new guidelines. It's really up to businesses to determine how to follow or not follow these standards. So with that, do you have any recommendations on how our listeners can really make this determination?
Well, from the jump, one of the things that we liked about the fact that ISO put these standards out, is the fact that it's the ISO that did it. So, like, just by right of who they are, like any, there's a lot of small businesses that if you start talking about ISO 9001, 4001, they're like, whatever. It's numbers and acronyms. Good for you. But for anybody that knows what those things are, it's like you probably know because it's painful, or at least not all that. It's not fun to go through ISO 9001 certification, for instance. But that said, getting certified, getting the blessing of the ISO, or being able to say we adhere to these standards or that standards, carries weight in international commerce. So for me at least, like who's putting these standards out matters. And I think because it came from them, um, that kind of affords learning leaders the opportunity to within the own within their own organization, walk around with these and trumpet a little bit about where these came from, where it's like, I didn't just pull these out. This wasn't like, oh, so and so at Harvard got together with so and so at Yale, and this is what they came up with. It's like, no, no, no. This wasn't baked up in a back room. Like this is relevant to business. Like same organization that puts out all these other things. Like that's who came up with this. So like it came from business for business. Um, and so I think while there is no formal audit process, for it, there never had been one either for Kirkpatrick, you know, and so I think from a compliance standpoint, like uh, I'm I'm not sure what organizations might want to do internally to say they are or aren't following bits and pieces of this, because I think at least for right now, it's going to take some companies a little bit of experimentation and trying to apply some of this and finding out where it does and where it doesn't work for them. I mean, one of the things that the standards is not shy about is they're trying to make them broadly applicable, and they acknowledge that if you're a large organization, there's a whole lot of different variables that you have to contend with. Where if you're a small organization, a lot of these things, or some of the metrics and some of the concerns about training just aren't going to exist because you don't have the same problems maybe of scale, of a need for international training. Now you might not, but the likelihood that you are is all companies are different, and kind of like we said, to the extent that Kirkpatrick was a bad one size fits all hat. I think the ISO is trying to say we are not attempting, like yeah, it's supposed to be broadly applicable, but it's like the way everybody's going to wear this hat is not going to look the same. So if you don't have um if you don't have a lot of learning technology, say in an organization, well, then there's a whole bunch of stuff that either maybe you won't have access to, or just stuff that's not going to concern you. Whereas if you're a huge multinational organization, you have a complex but like well functioning learning technology stack, and you're dealing with there's a whole different range of variables, and I think a whole different different variety of metrics that are even available, in terms of efficiency or effectiveness and outcomes. So the how you say, I think we're adhering to the ISO 30437 standards is just to like say that you're doing it and try.
Yeah.
Because I don't think there's a checklist for it. Um, but again, like I would encourage people to I think at least like test the waters, because again, you walk around talking about Dr. Donald Kirkpatrick, um, in a bunch of boardrooms, and people don't know who you are. You walk around saying there's ISO standards on this, and you're probably going to catch more ears with that sort of statement. So I think just off the jump, like politically, it helps. Like who developed these standards for how organizations try to socialize them and apply them in their own companies. Because as Michelle alluded to, like they're not the simplest to go through, but like I said, it was made by business for business.
Score business. Love that. Well, as we mentioned earlier, and we've kind of alluded to this throughout this conversation, I think how you put it was these guidelines are really sort of illuminating a pathway for training measurement um, for learning leaders. But what about for training providers and vendors? How do you see these guidelines impacting the training vendor market?
That's a great question. So I think the way that it could potentially impact the training provider market, or at least how it might change vendors, um, is in one sense that it gives them a language, I think, to walk into some organizations and sort of say, hey, what are you already doing? Are you looking at this or that, or like it I think they can go into somewhere and start talking about, well, what information are you getting to senior leadership about training? What information is getting to learners about training? What information is getting out to line managers about training? Like what sort of things are you telling them? What sort of metrics are you communicating to them? Like they can come in and I think start asking detailed questions rather than have to start from, are you measuring level one metrics? Is everybody circling the smiley face or the frowny face based on how they felt about training? Like I think rather than be boxed in by the four levels of Kirkpatrick, um, they can have a much broader conversation with customers about what they're doing, and I think it's in their interests to start to do that. I mean, it might not be the most you know exciting and interesting thing to talk about for some businesses, um, you know, but I look at it this way: if I'm a vendor, um, and maybe and I don't know what these things are, and the customer's talking about them, then that's probably not good for me. Um, but also if I'm a vendor, um, I think these guidelines, maybe show how the product or the service I'm offering should or could have an impact on the organization. Like maybe there's a solution that somebody offers, that does a lot of good things for the customers that use it, that you're never going to see articulated in a Kirkpatrick level 1 to 4 type of analysis of whatever's going on. So I think if vendors try to embrace these, it can give them a lot more ways to substantiate the effect of what their solutions are doing. Maybe the types of results that they can tell customers to expect. Because like if say their solution is all about efficiency, well then that's what it is. So they can tell people that's what it's designed to do. Might not move the needle on any of your outcomes. That's up for you to decide. These are the outcomes that our product affects. So this is what it's meant to do. This is what you can expect it to do. Because it's akin to, like, you go to the store and you buy a new cooking pot and you bring it home and stare at it and be like, where is my dinner? Like, what is wrong with this stupid thing? It's like, no, there's a few other steps in it. Like, once, like, you have the stuff, but that doesn't get you, the answers. Um, so I think from the vantage point of providers, it's business opportunities, potential marketing messaging. I think it's a way to look at whatever the product or solution is you currently offer, and say, is there a different way to sort of take this puzzle piece and make it fit into more puzzles? Can we talk about a product differently? Can we talk about what it will do for the business differently? And by the same token, can we shape the language to the customer based on who we're talking to at the customer organization? Like, so if we're talking to the C-suite level in the client organization, what they want to know about learning, or maybe what's important to them, going to be different than head of learning. If you're talking to head of learning, have a different conversation than if you're talking to the C-suite. And I mean, that sounds like standard stuff for people. Because, yeah, of course, those stakeholders are going to have different interests, but I think this framework lets providers look at, like, well, what are those different interests? How might they differ? And where might they differ? What about training is going to be important to them? And so, in a sense, like, how can we help our customers better? And then how can we help them in ways where maybe they were already being helped and they didn't even know? Or how could they be helped in ways that they're not even aware that they need? So
Definitely.
that's how I, right or wrong, that's how I look at it.
I definitely see that these guidelines have the potential to improve communication across the board and tailor your messaging towards your audience, and it can only improve things if everyone is kind of speaking the same language and kind of reading from the same book, so to speak. um, but kind of with that, before we wrap up today, Tom, do you have any final takeaways that you like to share with our listeners?
Um, takeaways about measurement. Um, I mean, one of my favorite sort of statements about measurements that was just that all data isn't created equal. You know that like there's a lot of garbage information out there, and there's a lot of bad data um, that that gets used on a routine basis. You know, so like just because we have numbers doesn't mean those numbers are good. And I think uh, you know, like re-examining what we're doing with regards to evaluation stuff is always a really healthy question to ask. You know, I mean, history is replete with multiple times where we thought one thing, somebody looked at numbers a little more closely, and then we realized, whoops a daisy, that was wrong. You know, like so it's like the job is never done. Like measurement is not necessarily going to get um I think easier. Like I don't think we're ever going to get to to a point, say like with an AI where you can just be like, tell me everything I need to know. And it's just going to give you all of those answers magically, you know, like in the right context, in the frame the right way, you know, relevant to everybody, the way that it needs to be. Um, you know, because I think it takes some discernment of what information is worthwhile and what isn't. Um, I mean, the I heard it the other day. The example that kind of comes to mind is like the whole idea that that there's another planet somewhere out there beyond Pluto that's lurking around, and because there's something with measurements and Neptune's orbit shouldn't be the way it was. Like, you know, they found out like for decades that was a thing that kind of bubbled. And, I mean, it's more or less like a conspiracy level thing at this point. But eventually they figured out that like what was causing that was one rogue data set from one observatory where like they had just changed some machinery, so the data was a little bit off from that one place. You know, it's like reputable observatory, you would trust most other stuff they put out, but you know, like somebody sneezed on the lens, you got some bad data, and and that's it. You know, and if you reanalyze it and excludes the bad data, then you get a closer answer, which is there's nothing wrong with Neptune's orbit. You know, but like that's just kind of an example. Like yeah, you can have lots of numbers. Doesn't mean you should use all of them. It doesn't mean all of them are going to be useful. And I think in large part that's a like a riddle. I think that L&D people have to solve, where it's like on one hand it's like we need more information, we need more data to answer the questions that we have, and on the other hand we get all this information and it's like this is too many answers. Like I don't have all the questions for all the stuff that this data can give me. You know, so it's like a catch 22 from both directions. Um, and or I think like that's the sentiment that maybe a lot of people get left with. Um, you know, but again, all data is not good data. You know, like some of it can and should be thrown out. You know, and just because say you have level 1 outcomes, that doesn't might not mean anything. You know, like there's like it's one of my favorite sort of unpopular correlations in the you know academic journals about training is like one of the things they tend to find is the more you enjoy the training, the less you tend to learn. You know, it's like so
Wow.
this idea that like like should love this training, and then that's going to make them really engaged, and everything that you show them is going to stick in their head.
It's interesting.
Not quite. Like yes, there's some truth to that. If they hate it, they're not going to engage with it at all. But like it doesn't need to be a feel good hug fest, and that promotes the best learning. It's like learning is supposed to be hard. Like you're supposed to fail at it. It's not supposed to be easy. You know, and I think same with evaluation. Like it's not easy. It's going to be hard. I don't think it's going to get easier as we get access to more and more information. And there's more and more ways to automate how we analyze that information for better or worse. It's it's not going to get easy. But it is, I think, as long as we all know, like, all data is not good data, like, we can exclude some. Data doesn't have feelings. It's not going to call us at 2 a.m. and ask us why we left it. Like, it's fine. It's fine. It's okay to, to not necessarily cherry pick so all you have is good news, but I think it's okay to try to only work with quality data, or at least focus only on working with quality data. Um, because for as much power as I think it gives us, uh, to have insights and to have information that we've sourced from somewhere in an organization, um, if if we don't know that what we're using is the best stuff, then, you know might be great that we have it, but we could end up uh, wasting some time rather than actually promoting efficiency and effectiveness in learning.
Great
I don't know if
points.
that's sunshiny, but
I love that. Great note to end on. And with that, Tom, thank you so much for speaking with us today on the podcast.
thank you. It was a pleasure to be here.
For more resources on training measurement, check out the description as well as the show notes for this episode at trainingindustry.com/podcast, and visit the Training Industry Research Store, also linked in the description and in the show notes, to shop our entire research catalog. Lastly, don't forget to rate and review us wherever you tune in to the business of learning.